if as if that wasn't enough, the Supreme Court is considering affirmative action, whether it will be upheld. And so we're in an interesting and precarious time, but I'm glad that we get to come together and sort of fight back against these attacks. So to level us for our conversation and for the afternoon, we do have a special guest. But before I introduce that special guest, we're going to talk about our first banned book that we are going to lift up. So as you can see on the screen, The Hate U Give is one of the most banned books in the country. Isn't that insane? Birthed out of the Black Lives Matter movement, a young woman who has to grapple with her home in a poor neighborhood and her school life at a more affluent school is thrown into a conundrum when she sees her childhood friend gunned down by police. And this is the book that we're going to start the conversation off with today. So to do a reading from this book and to level set and to kick off the conversation is none other than the President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, Damon Hewitt. So Damon, I will pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Maya. So here's the reading excerpt from The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. Right, lack of opportunities, Daddy says. Corporate America don't bring jobs to our communities, and they damn sure ain't quick to hire us. Then, shucks, even if you do have a high school diploma, so many of the schools in our neighborhoods don't prepare us well enough. That's why when your mama talked about sending you and your brothers to Williamson, I agreed. Our schools don't get the resources to equip you like Williamson does. It's easier to find some crack than it is to find a good school around here. Now, think about this, he says. How did the drugs even get in our neighborhood? This is a multi-billion-dollar industry we're talking about, baby. That shit is flown into our communities, but I don't know anybody with a private jet, do you? No, exactly. Drugs come from somewhere, and they're destroying our community, he says. You got folks like Brenda who think they need them to survive. And then you got the Khalils who think they need to sell them to survive. The Brendas can't get jobs unless they're clean, and they can't pay for rehab unless they get jobs. When the Khalils get arrested for selling drugs, they either spend most of their life in prison, another billion-dollar industry, or they have a hard time getting a real job and probably start selling drugs again. That's the hate they're giving us, baby. A system designed against us. That's THUG, Thug Life. The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. I want to thank you, Maya, and the Lawyers Committee team for bringing us together today. That text is powerful. There was a film adaptation, as well, as many of you know, that was to varying degrees true to the text. And one of the proudest moments I've had in my career was not being in a courtroom or being at a rally, as I was earlier today for the Freedom to Learn campaign. It was being able to sponsor dozens of young people in coordination with the entity I once led, the Executives Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, and the Advancement Project, my good friend Judith Brown Dianis, to bring dozens of young people to a private screening of the film. And of course, they got copies of the book as well. And that is what's at stake, those foundational experiences that allow young people to learn and think, and then act upon that knowledge. Across the country, we know there's a wave of disinformation campaigns, book bans, curriculum restrictions that have intentionally denied students access to fact-based, culturally relevant teaching and ideas and concepts. These orchestrated efforts are wide-ranging, but they often target historical facts about the Black experience and about the experiences of other people of color. For so long, education was predicated on exclusion, from criminalizing efforts to teach enslaved Africans how to read and write, to de jure segregation of K-12 schools and higher ed, to now efforts to limit access to higher education by going after affirmative action. It's almost as if as soon as affirmative action existed, it was under attack. And we're litigating that case in the US Supreme Court as well. Now we're moving from exclusion to something else. It's as if they now want to erase us and other communities from the very pages of history. But we also know these tactics are less about true history and more about actually the future. You see, there's a clear link between the suppression of Black voices and ideas and those of other communities and targeted efforts to support, or rather to suppress, a growing multiracial democracy. They know that the freedom to learn is the freedom to vote. They know that the freedom to learn is the freedom to organize, that the freedom to learn is the freedom to seek prosperity and abundance for your family and your neighborhood and your community. They know that freedom to learn is the freedom to decide what public safety means and looks like on our own terms. They know that the freedom to learn is the freedom of bodily autonomy, that the freedom to learn is the freedom to build power and to build the future that we deserve. That's what they're afraid of. They want to deprive us of the future we deserve. If you think about the height of the civil rights movement and today, there's so many parallels. The Lawyers Committee was founded in 1963, the pivotal summer of the civil rights movement, just days after two important things happened. Sadly, Medgar Evers, the field secretary for the NAACP, was assassinated in the driveway of his own home on June 12, 1963. Around that same time, just the day before, in fact, just hours before, George Wallace, then governor of Alabama, stood in the schoolhouse door to stop integration of the school. That's when the Lawyers Committee was founded, in the height, in the pivotal moment of the civil rights movement, just months before the March on Washington. Fast forward 60 years later, and we're facing some of the same battles. Certainly there's all types of vigilante violence. There is state violence against Black people. We've seen it everywhere from Baltimore to Ferguson, to Memphis, Tennessee, and everywhere in between, Minneapolis, what have you. But we're also seeing these efforts to, figuratively at least, stand in the schoolhouse door, this time not only blocking students, but also blocking books, blocking ideas, blocking knowledge, the knowledge that is power. And it's all connected. Just a couple of weeks ago, a conservative operative spoke to a group of supporters and donors and said that there are a number of threats to control for a conservative agenda in this country, and one of them is college students voting. Think about that. We like to think about the moral arc of the universe inherently bending towards justice, that things continue to get better, but they only get better when we bend that sucker, when we bend that arc. And so whether it's banning books that contain ideas that make people think and challenge America to be more inclusive, or passing bills aimed at censoring discussions around race and gender in the classroom, or targeting the voting rights of college students and even elder adults as if they're a threat. This is a coordinated anti-democratic agenda. It is not happening in a vacuum. It is part of an assault on the freedom of this generation, of the next generation, to learn, to live, and to lead. This is an attack on our collective history, but also an attack on our collective future, and the one that we're trying to build right now. And that's why policymakers and gatekeepers and others must join the front lines of resistance. There is no neutrality. There is no debate. Either you're on the right side of history and law and justice and freedom, or you're not. And so we're calling upon every entity to join us. That means individuals, that means educators, that means, yes, students and parents too. That means school administrators. It means lawmakers. It means corporate executives. It means lawyers at law firms. It means entities that help to be gatekeepers in higher education, like entities like the College Board and others. We need everybody to be on the right side of this, because there really is a bright line. Now, on a personal note, a lot of people are talking about AP curriculum, Black Studies curriculum in Florida and elsewhere. Now, I was privileged to attend a high school in New Orleans, where I grew up, that had access to AP classes. We had all kinds of AP offerings. There was American Studies, which I took. I took AP Fine Arts. There was European and Physics and AP Calculus. I think AP Biology even. I didn't take all of those. But there was no AP Black Studies, AP African American Studies. And I really wish there was. The question is whether it's AP curriculum, whether it is texts like The Hate You Give, whether it's just simple information, like the kind of information our clients in Oklahoma are threatened to be deprived of, to learn about the Trail of Tears, to learn about massacre of Native peoples, to learn about the massacre of Black people through the Tulsa Massacre. These are the kind of things that the Attorney General of Oklahoma and others don't want students to learn about. They want to take that stuff out of the classroom. out of the curriculum to erase history and erase the people. And that is exactly what we can't stand for. And that's why we represent the Black Emergency Response Team in Oklahoma, and also the local NAACP state conference, and other individuals and organizations standing up against this Oklahoma House Bill 1775. And frankly, that bill must have been created in 1775 because it's trying to turn the clock all the way back to them. So that's why, my friends, we need you to continue rallying together. We need us to stand tall. We have to call on every person of conscience to have a backbone and to act on their conscience and to be on the right side. Today and every day, the Lawyers Committee stands ready to support, ready to fight, inside and outside of the courts. We're going to support truth and equity in our schools and our campuses, our workplaces, and our communities. We're so proud to be a partner of the Freedom to Learn Coalition. I want to thank all of the other organizations that are part of this, who are on this web event, and those who are not. I want to thank Professor Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, my friend, my mentor. We honored her at our Lawyers Committee Gala last year. She's so worthy of every honor as a visionary behind this effort, along with Professor Cheryl Harris at UCLA and the good brother Khalil Gibran Muhammad, professor now at Harvard. They are among the visionaries who are calling this nation to consciousness, and we are so pleased and proud to follow your lead. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Damon. You said it best, right? There's nothing else to add after that. I think that really lays the foundation for the rest of the conversation that we're going to have this afternoon. Speaking of Oklahoma, we're really excited to take the conversation there. As Damon mentioned, the Lawyers Committee has been on the front lines of fighting some of these fights of censorship and the like in Oklahoma. And I have a really special colleague who's going to share a little bit about that with you. In the meantime, let's chat about one of the most banned books in Oklahoma, called Killers of the Flower Moon by David Graham. So in the 1920s, the richest people per capita in the world were the Osage Indian Nation in Oklahoma. Then they were killed one by one. This book follows the investigation into their deaths and is a searing indictment of the callousness and prejudice toward American Indians that allowed the murders to operate with impunity for so long. So to read a really poignant excerpt from this book for us is my colleague, Taylor Dumpson, who is Associate Counsel for the Criminal Justice Project here at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. And Taylor just happens to be one of those leaders on the front line supporting those folks in Oklahoma in these fights. Taylor?
Thank you, Maya. History is a merciless judge. It lays bare our tragic blunders and foolish missteps and exposes our most intimate secrets, wielding the power of hindsight like an arrogant detective who seems to know the end of the mystery from the outset. David Graham, Killers of the Flower Moon, Oil, Money, Murder, and the Birth of the FBI. As Maya mentioned, as Maya and Damon mentioned, HB 1775 is a lawsuit that is currently plaguing the state of Oklahoma and Indian Territory and is having drastic impacts for youth all around the state. This lawsuit is not just limited to, as Damon mentioned, instances related to Black communities. I want to specifically focus right now on tribal leader concerns with this particular bill. Tribal leaders and tribal congresses, including the Osage Nation and the Intertribal Council, through the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole nations have spoken out and passed resolutions demanding the repeal of HB 1775, Oklahoma's local anti-CRT and diversity and inclusion law, due to concerns that the law was chilling the truth and accurate teaching of Indigenous history. This includes some teachers being uncomfortable with teaching Killers of the Flower Moon, which depicts the nonfiction Osage Reign of Terror, where non-Indians killed Indigenous people in the Osage Nation for oil underneath of their land. Unfortunately, because of the way that this law has been written, some teachers across the state have been uncomfortable with teaching this book out of fear that they could lose their teaching license. This is just one of several books affected by HB 1775, which prohibits the teaching of certain concepts related to race and gender from being discussed in the classroom because it could cause students to feel guilt or anguish on account of their race. In one Oklahoma school district, books like Frederick Douglass's autobiography, Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eyes, and one of my favorite books, Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, has been removed from the lists of anchor texts, while books written by white male authors have remained. Next slide.
Goodness. That's really scary, Taylor. Could you tell the group about the other folks that we're representing in this case in Oklahoma?
Absolutely. So in our lawsuit challenging HB 1775, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, the National ACLU, the ACLU of Oklahoma, and pro bono law firm Schulte, Roth, and Zabel filed the first federal lawsuit challenging this, and we represent a diverse group of multiracial Oklahomans, ranging from K-12 students to college students and members of OU's Black Emergency Response Team, which is a student organization that was created in response to instances of on-campus racism. This coalition also includes K-12 educators and university professors, as well as members of the NAACP State Conference and the American Indian Movement Indian Territory Chapter. This lawsuit challenges HB 1775, whose leading bill authors in both the Oklahoma House and Senate declared that the bill's intent was to prohibit conversations related to implicit bias, systemic racism, and intersectionality, as well as other now banned topics like meritocracy. The lawsuit argues that HB 1775 not only chills students and educators' First Amendment right to learn about these issues, but it also prevents students from having an open and honest dialogue about American history, one that includes the experiences and viewpoints of all historically marginalized people across this country. This lawsuit also argues that HB 1775 intentionally targets and denies access to culturally relevant teaching and ideas that reflect the history and lived experiences of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, women, girls, and LGBTQ students.
Taylor, you recently took a trip to Oklahoma. Can you tell us about it?
Sure thing. So last week, I was honored to visit with some of our clients and other concerned members of the community in Oklahoma. We had the pleasure of visiting the Osage Nation and the Osage Tribal Museum to learn more about how HB 1775 is affecting their efforts to educate people about their own tribal history. As especially before Flowers or Killers of the Flower Moon becomes debuted in movies, as it has been recently done in a Hollywood production. We also spoke with members of AIM Indian Territory about the importance of teaching youth about the 36 distinct tribal nations that call Oklahoma and Indian Territory home. We also had the opportunity to visit the home of Black Wall Street in Tulsa's Greenwood District, or also the site of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, and had the chance to hear from NAACP members about why teaching the accurate and truthful history is so important for students in their community. What struck me the most about my time during this visit was the shared belief that in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been in the past, including where you come from, the contributions of people that look like you, and to learn from the mistakes that were made along the way. This helps all students and people, not just students of color, develop a sense of self, belonging, and empathy. And one of the other things that I learned, especially from being on the ground in Oklahoma, in the short time that I was there and being able to speak with folks directly on the ground that are directly impacted, that preserving the ability to have open and complete and honest dialogue about American history is especially important in the state of Oklahoma, particularly due to the state's complex history surrounding state formation, land runs and land theft, displacement of Aboriginal tribes and the Trail of Tears, the struggles of freedmen and loyal citizens of the 5 tribes, the Buffalo Soldiers, the Tulsa Race Massacre, and the legacy and present-day impact of segregation. In the words of Oklahoman legislator and civil rights pioneer Clara Luper, who led the 1958 Katz Drug Store sit-in in downtown Oklahoma City, a year and a half before the sit-in in Greensboro, North Carolina, she said, The more you know about women, the more you know about Black people, the more you know about Indians, the better off you are. The history books have been written by white men. All students in Oklahoma and students across the nation deserve the freedom to learn from folks of all backgrounds, viewpoints, and experiences without the unlawful restraint of access to information regarding racial and ethnic minorities, women and girls, and members of the LGBTQ community. Thank you, Maya, for letting me share today and to be able to read an excerpt from Killers of the Flower Moon.
Of course. Thank you so much for educating us. I feel like we could have spent the whole hour on Oklahoma, so we appreciate you and all the work that you're leading there, Taylor. Okay, folks, now let's go to a pretty hot state, figuratively and metaphorically. We're headed to Florida. Oh, Florida. Oh, Florida, right? Let's all say it together. But instead of starting with the challenges, we're going to start with some of the beautiful work happening in Florida, in particular, work that is a specific program that is fighting for equal educational opportunity in communities that are often overlooked. I'm super excited to introduce our next guests, Ms. Amina and Samela, who are respectively the director and a former scholar at the Elevation Scholars Program in Orlando, Florida. Hi, Amina. Hi, Samela.
Hi, Maya. Hello, everyone.
Thank you guys for joining us. So let's just start at the beginning. Amina, can you tell us what exactly is the Elevation Scholars Program? Why are you a thing? And what is it that you all do?
Absolutely. So the Elevation Scholars is a local nonprofit here in Orlando. And our goal is to help high achieving, high need students, and high need is what the world calls low income students get into and through college. Ultimately, we want to invest in the very student whose opportunities are being taken away from them. As you see on the screen, a number of our students are first generation low income students. But they have absolutely earned the right to go to a four-year university. And Florida is making that harder for them to achieve every day. And so we come in and say, not only can you afford to go to a four-year, but you've earned it, and so you should go to the best. And we do that by offering a 5-year award. And so we do some very intensive college admissions coaching that helps our students get into top tier universities and colleges throughout the nation. And so this is a screen of like our latest class and some of the schools that they're going to be going to. And then the next 4 years, that's year one, the last 4 years of the 5 years, is we're going to support every one of those students while they're in college to make sure that they persist and actually graduate and can get a job and have a really great first step. Ultimately, we just really believe in the power of education and its ability to change our students' lives. And we invest in dreamers. Like our students is not just any kid, it's not just the high achieving student, it's not just the high need student. All of these students have demonstrated our values, which are leadership, service, kindness, and discipline. They want to change the world. They want to have impact. In situations like what we're discussing today, it angers them and they're passionate about it. And because they have that passion and they want to create change, we're investing in them. And we think them going to college, being able to be educated, get degrees, advocate, have outlets to advocate, is really the thing that they need in order to propel them into their future so that they really can be change agents in this world.
Yeah, that's amazing. So there's policy work, right? Fighting against some of these attacks, but then there's also the practical work, getting really close to these students and helping them to transition and to break down some of these barriers. So Mela, could you just really quickly tell us what this program has meant for you and meant to you?
Yeah, as a first generation college student, it's meant everything. I think it really made the difference in me succeeding in college because just certain things you wouldn't know, not because you don't want to know, but maybe because your parents haven't been before, that I would go to and ask Elevation for help with. And just them really providing that support and the resources. Like she said, we're gonna go seek it out. So I'm like, okay, there's like campus tutoring and resources, but when you're in these campuses with different people of different backgrounds and you're trying to figure out where do you fit, and then sometimes you're questioning, do you even fit? It's very reassuring to go and, call Amina be like, hey, this is what's going on. And, you know, you just get a second input, and you also feel like you're not going through it alone, because they also went to college and they're first in too. And so they can affirm that, hey, you're not crazy, like you're not unworthy, you have the right to be here. And so for me, it helped me navigate a space that I don't feel like was meant for me, but I could go through it and walk victoriously and authentically and still come back in my community and be as like effective and as you know, kind as I, you know, instill all the information that I've learned to like my community.
Which you're absolutely doing, and we're so proud. But you know, headlines like this don't help in Florida. All this great work, my goodness, what's going on down there? Amina, you don't have to go into the weeds here, but just in general, you interact with students and their families, high school students and their families every single day. Generally, how are they feeling? What are they thinking here?
Yeah, this all the legislation that's happening in Florida has been unnerving, especially for us as an organization. The very thing that we're trying to combat, the inequities in education, are only becoming stricter. And it's becoming harder. And so at one point we felt like we didn't have to worry about our students in high school, right? Like they attend Title I schools, but they are taking AP and IB courses, and they're getting the absolute best rigor and the best education possible to them from Florida. And so when we heard that there could possibly be an African American studies class, even for me as a once high achieving student, it felt like an answer to something I never knew I needed. Like I did not experience taking an African American studies class until college. And so much of what I know about my history and our culture, and even how to name the experiences and things that I go through day to day as a Black woman in America, came from my college classes and then the work that I've chosen to do on my own as an adult. So when I heard that it would be available to a high school student, I just felt, for me, it felt like a win that like our students like Samela and those coming after her who were so passionate about creating change and having impact will finally have more tools and more information and more knowledge so that they can win battles and properly be equipped and skilled and tooled and just knowledgeable and where the real gaps are. And then to learn that it all got shut down, that it was considered a threat, that it's considered lies, just really invalidates our experience. And I believe all of our students, and Samela can share how she feels about this herself, but as a parent, as a fellow parent in Florida, it's really hard to conceive of the fact that, like for some of my students, some of the literature that they read, we'll have to tell them don't take that to school because it's illegal, or have to help them and their parents figure out how do you navigate being expelled or exposed, or getting in trouble because of a book, or because of talking about certain topics that are important and are factual and are relevant to you as an individual. Those are not the types of crimes, quotations around that we ever thought we would have to help navigate. But in this current climate, it sounds like it's something we have to now start thinking about and preparing for in order to properly support our students. And that's just really unfortunate.
Man, there it is, folks. You heard it first here. Amina Harris breaking it down for us. This is why it's so important to have both sides of the conversation, the policy and the litigation, right? But also the folks that are on the ground, having relationships with these students and these families so that we can understand how the headlines and the policy changes are affecting real students and real people. So this conversation is so important. Now, Amina, we're gonna pivot here. Remind me, are you from Duval County?
I'm not. I'm from
You're
Dade.
not. Okay,
Yeah,
you're from.
got
it. I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh, I'm not gonna hear the end of that. Let me put some respect on your name, Amina. Well, there is a book. Speaking of African American history, a biography of Harriet Tubman before she was Harriet that has been banned in Duval County in Florida. Speaking of African American history, right? Speaking of books that may be illegal, right, to bring to class, this is one of them. So to round out our conversation about Florida, about the great work that you're doing, but also the challenges that you're facing, we have a brief excerpt from this book. And Amina or Samela, either of you can take it and share it with us. And if you have young kids, please get this book. I read it and found it so beautiful and beautifully illustrated. I'll turn it over to you guys.
Samela, I'm giving it to you, dear.
All right. Before she was a suffragist, she was General Tubman, rising out of the fog, armed with courage, strong in the face of rebels and planters and overseers. As they watched, fields burned and bridges fall, and 700 slaves stopped chomping and start running to a woman who ferried them to freedom on the Combahee River, turned River Jordan. Lisa Klein Ransom, before she was Harriet.
What a beautiful poetic voice, Samela. Now, before I let you two ladies go, I have to tell the people why I love this program so much. You may recognize my last name is really similar to this kid on the screen. My husband was the very first Elevation scholar. And so, oh wow, that made me a little emotional. This program is so near and dear to our hearts, and we appreciate the work that you've done and continue to do so much, Amina. And Samela, listen, we can't wait for all of the amazing work that you're going to do. To the folks on the call, Samela is headed to law school soon, so please be hitting her up around internships and all that great stuff. So ladies, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope to bring you back soon to talk more about the great work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, team. Now let's move to another state that has a lot going on, right? There's the Texas, there's the Florida, there's the Oklahoma, but another state, Ohio, is actually facing some really huge challenges when it comes to education equity and censorship and true history and the like. And so to speak a little bit about this, we have a super special guest who I'm so pleased to bring to the floor, Dr. Jill Galvin. Dr. Galvin is an associate professor at The Ohio State University. She is an executive board member for the Ohio AAUP. And she is a leader of the Save Ohio Higher Ed coalition in Ohio, which she'll tell you a little bit more about. And lastly, I have to share that we love Dr. Galvin so much and her organization because she is, and her organization is a part of the Reason Coalition that some of you may have heard the Lawyers Committee education team has been working on. So Dr. Jill, how are you? It's good to see you.
I'm good, thank you. And thank you for holding this. And I'm sorry to have been late. It was some confusion on my end with the tech.
No worries.
Yes, so I really appreciate this forum, especially because my area of teaching is English. So the idea of banned books really hits home. So I am on the executive board of the local chapter at Ohio State of the AAUP, which is the American Association of University Professors, which is a decades long organization of advocacy for professors around the country, and then there are local chapters. And as Maya mentioned, we then created as a kind of offshoot group, Save Ohio Higher Ed, which is meant to actually just think about keeping quality education at the higher educational level in Ohio and making sure that it's accessible, that it's affordable, that it proceeds by values of justice, that employees are treated fairly. So it has a lot of goals. And that's one of the ways that I became involved with and got to know Maya. In Ohio, sadly, there is a lot going on. I just came back from the State House for a protest over another bill that does not have to do with education. And so we just got a lot going on. But the reason that I can speak to what we're talking about today is that we do have this bill on the screen, Senate Bill 83, which is one of these bills that we're seeing obviously around the country. And in fact, it is modeled on this think tank written language that then state legislatures are simply copying. That is ostensibly about intellectual diversity, but of course is directly opposed to those values in trying to limit DEI programs, in trying to make them illegal, or to take away funding from schools that try to have those programs. There are many other ways in which SB 83 has been really a very threatening bill, and now there's a matching bill in the House. It censors what instructors can say in the sense that there is a requirement that syllabi be posted on websites, university websites with searchable, with keyword searches, which is obviously a recipe for harassment for instructors. And so you can really see how that would chill instruction. There's a mandate for an American history class with prescribed texts. There is a prohibition against academic relations with China. And there is a prohibition against striking by unions. So there's just, it's a huge bill. There's a lot going on, and we're really trying hard to defeat it. So at the AAUP level, at the Save Ohio Higher Ed level, one of the things that we've been doing is working particularly a lot with a local organization called Honesty for Ohio Education, which works at both the higher ed and the K through 12 level. And they're fantastic. And they've got a constant eye on the State House. And one of the major things that we did recently was to try to get a big turnout for the hearing at the State House on SB 83. And as you can see here, that turnout was amazing. It was over 500 people. And of those 500 people, 9 of them were proponents, were supporters of the bill. All the rest were opponents. And that is, as I understand it, I think from the bill sponsor's own words, I think that was a record. And now we're in the process of really trying to get them to listen to all that opponent testimony, which included a lot of faculty, staff, organizations, students. Lots of students came out. So anyway, that's where we're at.
Goodness, a lot of folks could say, look at Ohio and say it's a model for these horrible bills, right? But other folks could look at Ohio and say, there's a model for some activism and for pushing back and for organizing. And so if any of you happen to be in Ohio and want to do some pushing back, in our follow-up email, we're going to have a link to the Honesty for Education in Ohio webpage, where there's a whole slew of ways that you can get involved in pushing back on some of this legislation. So Dr. Galvin, before we hop over to the reading, what would you say to folks to get them involved in this work? Why is it so important that it's not just these folks on the screen who are on the front lines, but it's people in the communities who are going to be affected by this issue to really speak up? Why is that important?
Well, I think it's about the next generation of citizens. Do we want them to be critically educated? Do we want them to understand the world that they operate in all kinds of spaces, right? At large in the workplaces, do we want them to value things like diversity and inclusion? Do we want them to be able to collaborate and to be respectful of other people? So it really is just about kind of what we want to pass on. This is a direct effort to limit passing on those values and to keep honestly power and voice very limited to certain sectors. And I will say that the collective energy I've seen around this bill has been amazing, and it's inspiring. And I think that gives hope.
Yeah, and I love how you mentioned values, right? This isn't just about small one-off policy decisions. It's about our values and sticking up for those. Thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing in Ohio, on campus and beyond. But let's talk about the book bans in Ohio. Well, we've in the previous books that we talked about, they've been banned because of mentions of race, right? But in Ohio, many of the books are banned because they're uplifting LGBTQ plus issues. And so Genderqueer is a book that is banned all across Ohio, but it's also one of the most banned books in the country. And so to stand in solidarity with the students who have had this book banned, we're going to read a really small excerpt and then thank Dr. Galvin for all the work that she's doing on the front lines in Ohio and for being an example to all of us. Dr. Galvin?
This is a quote from an entry that the author wrote in 2004 when they were 15. I don't want to be a girl. I don't want to be a boy either. I just want to be myself.
I think we all can relate to just wanting to be ourselves and to be seen for ourselves. So I think I can speak for the participants. They're all giving you claps and snaps for all of your great work and for speaking so eloquently to why this is important. And we will be behind you in the fight in Ohio and make sure that we share all of these great resources with the folks who are on the call. So thank you so much. We appreciate you for joining the call and sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, folks. There's another state that we really struggle with, right? Let's go and talk about Texas. Let's talk about Texas. And to begin this conversation, we have someone that I love so much and who is so instrumental to the work that the Educational Opportunities Project has done here at the Lawyers Committee. Brianna McBride, who is graduating in just a few days with a master's degree from the University of Texas at Austin. So please send her your congratulations. Brianna was also a student leader extraordinaire at UT Austin. She is an author. I'm going to link the book in the follow-up email so that you all can take a look. And an amazing person to being in community with when it comes to these issues. So Brianna, we're so glad that you're here.
Thank you so much, Maya, for the warm words. I love y'all at the Lawyers Committee. I love you, Maya, and I'm really happy to be able to come and be here with you all. So thank you.
Yeah. So listen, what we've talked about today is that these issues are intertwined. It's not just about book bans. It's not just about curriculum. Dr. Galvin really said it nicely. It's about our values, right, of a multiracial democracy and what that means. And part of this web of attacks on education have to do with affirmative action and how that's at the Supreme Court's feet now. We should know their ruling in the next few weeks, and we're on the lookout for that. But what folks on the call may not know is that you were one of our clients in the affirmative action case at UT Austin. Tell us, what gave you the courage to be a part of that case and to speak up? Why did you think that this was so important while you were an undergraduate?
No, yes, thank you, Maya. And I'll say, when I was an undergrad, I think I was a sophomore at the time, something like that. Time flies.
Yeah.
But the reason why I felt very attached to want to say something, to be a part of this work, is because I myself actually was a tour guide. I worked in admissions, and I was one of the only Black tour guides there, out of the 80 of us. There may have been 8. And I think that, I felt very attached because I knew what it felt like to be a prospective student who is coming to an institution as large as the University of Texas and not feel like I see myself or my community on that campus. And when I realized that I just needed to tell my story and what drew me to actually stay at the institution of UT Austin, which was not only the fact that I was able to meet people prior to attending that did look like me and were in community with me, but when I got to campus, there were continued programs that existed that helped support me throughout my journey as a freshman, sophomore. And because of that, and knowing that the attack on affirmative action and on the ideals of what affirmative action is based on can not only harm the admissions process, but all the other things that happen on college campuses. So I had to be very vocal, and I felt that I had a very unique perspective to bring, being that I also worked in admissions. So I had to say something. I had to join. We had to do it.
And we're so glad you did. So I mentioned that these cases and issues are interwoven and intertwined, but Texas has a lot going on, right? How do you see, particularly from your point of view, being in Texas, how do you see these issues connecting? What are folks feeling on the ground there? Where are you all in Texas when these matters?
Let me tell you, and I should have gave you this information before too. So I'm actually part of a student coalition called the Texas Students for DEI.
Of course
and
you are.
we are working to advocate for DEI on college campuses because, like you said, there are bills all across the country that have the similar language that are trying to basically get rid of DEI programs, policies, etc., masked as this trying to increase XYZ, right? What their arguments are. And right now, a lot of students are afraid. They're very alarmed. And because of that, they're mobilizing and mobilized. And not just at the University of Texas, but our coalition is expanding to other institutions, because right now our Board of Regents and all the Texas is in session right now. You know, there's so much going on back and forth, especially with these bills, that we're actually at a well, I'm here, but we actually have a Freedom to Learn Texas Day of Action that's happening right now at the Texas Capitol. And on our Instagram, we're actually live right now. That is in coalition with the AAUP chapter in Texas. So I was super happy to see Dr. Galvin on and talking about that. But with that being said, even though students are alarmed, we are very committed to telling the story of what this means to us. What is DEI? Because, you know, the legislators, the legislators and, like, you know, these people who are trying to get rid of them, they do know what DEI is. And, you know, our biggest thing is that, as vague as the language can be, it's so harmful. And and even though on face value may not look like that, it can be. And that's what we're trying to fight against. And really advocate for ourselves and those who come behind us as well. And that's what students are feeling. So we're mobilized, we're at the capitals, we're testifying, we are at the Day of Actions, we are busing people to Texas, to Austin. Like, it is a full-fledged movement, and we are committed and have been doing so for the last couple of months. And it's been a journey.
I'm smiling because Texas is blessed to have you. I wrote down, you said they do know. I think that's so poignant. A lot of times we think these legislatures, they don't understand DEI. They don't get it. They're just writing something. They don't, no. They know full well. And this is a coordinated strategic attack against DEI and all of the other measures that we've talked about today. And speaking of attacks on DEI and book bans and the like, oh, it hurt my soul when I saw this. A beautiful book by the incomparable Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye, banned in Texas and banned all across the nation. Insane. Quickly, tell us a little bit about why this is insane, and then you can hop into our final reading of the excerpt from Toni Morrison's book.
Yes, and you know, and it's so disheartening, because I think that, you know, people are, and not even everyone, but like a lot of the opposition to these books, to these ideas, to these values are so coded. And I think that to me, the biggest thing is that they really don't want us to be empowered enough to change the system, right? Like, the Texas is now majority minority, right? Like, they don't want us who are so to speak, not even against the status quo, but because we disrupt just by our presence, they want to latch on to whatever they can to try to keep the status quo. But that is not going to happen. We refuse to back down. And I think that is what is stemming all these things, that we are demanding to know our history, to know who contributed to what, and how we can continue to empower our own people and communities to continue to do so, to make that change. And I think that's what they are trying to stop.
Well said. And you can end us off with this really fitting quote to go with what we've just discussed.
Yes, ma'am. So, from The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. They seem to have taken all of their smoothly cultivated ignorance, their exquisitely learned self-hatred, their elaborately designed hopelessness, and sucked it all up into a fiery cone of scorn that had burned for ages in the hollows of their minds, cooled and spilled over lips of outrage, consuming whatever was in its path.
Goodness. Well, thank you, Brianna, for doing our final reading and for lifting up all that's happening in the great state of Texas, because you're there. We're excited about your graduation. I'm going to attend the one virtually. And we're so excited about all the incredible work that you have done and will continue to do. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you. Okay, team, what an incredible lineup of these people on the front lines in their community, pushing back against these efforts. And listen, you heard them. They're doing this in all different ways. Some are engaging directly with students. Some are getting involved in coalitions. Some are writing pieces in media. But we're not here just to tell you about what these folks are doing and have done. We're here to call you to the front lines in your community as well. And so if you head over to freedomtolearn.net, you'll learn about all kinds of ways that you can engage in this fight against censorship and the accurate teaching of true history. So on this website, you'll have all kinds of resources, all kinds of ideas for events that you can host or things that you can do in your community to continue this work. By no means does this work end with the May 3rd day of action. And so we're challenging you. You've heard about these other folks on the front line, but we're challenging you to get involved in your community on the front line. And listen, you won't get off the hook, because in our follow-up email, we're going to link some of those actions and some of those pages where folks are getting engaged and on the front line. Now, let me check the chat and make sure we're good. I think so. I see a question in the chat, but because we are pressed for time and almost out of time, maybe we can come back to it, and that individual can reach out to us via email and we can circle back. But in the meantime, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this effort and for getting on the front lines in your communities. Everybody, have a great afternoon. We appreciate you.